programming languages or operating systems or whatever. The question is, what does the card program manager see when they are using this web-enabled interface? And for the most part, it is a web-enabled interface, because that is also the interface that allows an nearly infinite number of users. There's two options. One is what the card program manager is seeing is part of the underlying transaction processing system, or specifically a subset of data that is refreshed from that card transaction processing system. The phrase as delimited by the issuing bank is an important one. We'll come back to it in just a second. The second thing that the card program manager might be seeing is an interface to a totally separate application. And that application is refreshed on a regular basis with the transaction data, but it supports additional descriptive data and has some additional functions that are not actually functions that are found in the transaction processing applications. So we need to talk a little more about those differentiations. The separate application, because it is designed to support a card manager instead of designed to support the transaction processing, has two important capabilities that add greatly to its breadth and power. These are additional data categories and expense management, workflow, and rules capabilities. And we have arrows connecting these two because the functionality and the power of each is in fact leveraged and expanded by the existence of the other. So when we talk about additional data categories, we're talking, for starters, this application needs to capture the corporate structure of the company, the card customer. Where are the divisions? Where are the departments? The individual users need to be tagged as where they fit in divisions and departments. So we have an organizational structure, and we have the ability for each cardholder and user to be described in the context of that organizational structure. Now, you can see that if we're talking about one of the older forms of card processing applications, it's just that kind of an application is simply presenting you with transactions that were executed on a particular account. And that is good enough for being able to reconcile the expenses, but it's not good enough to be able to leverage, for example, workflow. When we say we want to talk about implementing policy, as an example, the policy might be that whenever I complete my expense reconciliation, it is routed to my direct manager for review and sign-off before it's sent into the general ledger or the accounting system or wherever it's going to go. That needs to be set up as a rule, a single rule that says for everybody's expenses, you go to the person above them in the organization, send the file over there, and wait for that person to approve it, queue it for them, queue it up in their to-do list. When that person approves it, then it goes into accounting. That sort of system survives over the long term because of the existence of the additional data categories that we just talked about up above. When my boss leaves, gets promoted, somebody comes in or is hired from outside, a different person may sit in that particular slot, but that new person is still designated in the context of the corporate structure as the one that is directly over me. And so workflow and rules use these additional data bits to create stronger functionality in the particular application. Now, going to the next slide, I'm going to have a particular example of this. Many of you are familiar with the question of straight-through processing, the ability to reuse all this data. Well, we see the cardholder inputs in this graphic as feeding the card program management system. Cardholder inputs are enriching the transaction data. It's saying, I have a restaurant charge. When I, as the user, go in there, I can actually make note of who I was entertaining, what company they were, which individuals. I can, in many cases, and we'll talk about this later, capture the receipts and add them into the application. So cardholder inputs enrich that data. with data that wasn't part of the original transaction, the original card transaction. We can also automate a bunch of inputs, just like we have put an organizational structure in there. We can take an automated feed that has all the active expense accounts that are allowed to be used. So what are the general ledger accounts to which expenses are going to be posted? We have HR. What are the active employees? Once you have set up this large organization, and I learned this when I spoke to the firm that had 50,000 cards, there is not a single person whose job is to keep that updated full-time, but rather they have automated an interface from their human resources system. So HR feeds a file to the card management system twice a week that not only says who are the new employees and where do they fit in this organizational structure, but also who has left, who's retired, who's taken another job. So it's active and inactivating employees is done in an automated way. And HR may also keep the business unit structure and move around the parts of the organization, but all of those things can be fed in an automated way. That's capturing the data that makes it reusable. Once it's reusable, now we can say, all right, the expenses that are in that card management system, we can pass those out the right-hand side of the diagram, the automated outputs. We'll feed the general ledger or the enterprise resource planning system by type of spend, by business unit, by part of the organization. The second arrow there is expense reporting by cardholder account. As an individual cardholder, I have to account for my expenses. I can generate that in an automated way. And then finally, the third one, as we mentioned earlier, is data for spend analytics. Now we have richer data, and we have the ability to sort by which part of the organization spent it and which individuals spent it. So the automated inputs and automated outputs is what we mean when we say straight-through processing. And that, although it requires the ability to capture some additional data above and beyond the transaction data that is presented by the card processing system, it makes it hugely more powerful in terms of what you can then do with it. So I want to give you 5 particular areas where these additional capabilities around the data, the ability to capture more data, and then the ability to use that data in rules and workflow. Workflows automate all kinds of processing. You can customize your procedures based on any kinds of internal rules. Who has to approve what? You can do internal messaging. You can use a system that knows how the organization is structured and then create a set of rules that says for individuals who fit into the organization this way, these things are going to happen. User work queues are an example. When you log in, instead of just having to search for your accounts and your tasks, in a workflow system, there's a to-do list right there when you log in that for you presents the next list of things that you ought to do. And it might be things that are your own tasks to reconcile your own expenses, but for example, an approver will find a list of reconciliations submitted by other people that are waiting for your approval before they can be passed on. And so those user work queues are a very powerful capability, and you can put anything you want to in anyone's queue if you use the rule base. One example is TSYS Center Suite supports this kind of thing. At the end, I'm going to give you a list of all the applications in these 5 particular functions that I talk about with examples. I'm just giving you one, but that doesn't mean the others don't do it. I want to be clear about this. I'm not creating a table here of all the functions and which applications do them. I'm looking individually at the important functions and providing one example each of who does support it. User self-servicing is a second very important function. It is essential and it is safe if, in fact, the database is sufficiently granular so that you can assign user rights to particular data elements. For example, the cardholder moves. I move house with my family. All I need to do is change my address. You can have a couple of different ways of thinking about this if you have user self-servicing. If you don't have user self-servicing, every time everybody in the company changes their address, either HR is going to do the automated update, or the card program manager is going to spend, all day today changing addresses for everybody that moved. That's obviously not a good idea. If you allow the cardholder access to that part of their account setup record, then you can let them change their own address. If you choose, in the workflow context, you can have a secondary control that says, yes, they can edit their address and they can change it, but the change won't take effect until it is reviewed and agreed by their direct manager, who obviously is the person closest to them in the organization that knows where they live, what are they doing. So if you want a secondary review, you can have it in that context. This is critical to making the whole card system efficient when you have a large number of users. You have to be able to let people take care of some of their own household, housekeeping functions. But as you can see, it requires the ability to separate the descriptions of the data elements in an individual account. In my account record, if I'm a card holder, my particular account record is not only my name and address, but also my limit, and what kinds of merchants I can use this card at. And clearly, one needs to be able to say, at the field level, yes, I can change my address, but no, I cannot change my limit. So those are the kinds of distinctions that the technology needs to support, and it is the structure of the database that's going to enable you to do that. One of the applications with a highly detailed and granular database that does allow you to do this is the First Data 360 Control product. We look at transaction data enrichment. I mentioned the idea that when I have an entertainment expense, I, as the user, should be able to add the names of the people that I took out for lunch because they were corporate customers. It's also true that I might need to take a meal charge and, in some cases, assign it to general travel expense, assign it to entertainment expense. If it's entertainment expense, sometimes it might go into a research budget. In my position where I would need to be talking to an expert in the field, I have a research budget which is different from a sales budget. We might be talking to somebody because we're trying to sell them something. So the capabilities of general ledger assignments and general ledger splits, including tax details, all of those functions are things that I as a user can do if the application supports my enriching the details around a particular transaction. Key dependency is that the corporate application has to customize the system to capture